Hi, my name is Omar Kahled, and I'm a high school U.S. history student sitting in today for Yohuru Williams. Here's what you need to sound smart about the American Civil War hospitals. Since the start of the war on April 12, 1861, both sides of this bloody conflict were devastated not only by battle, but by disease. Medicine in this period of time was very limited as not many advancements were made. Hospitals prior to this period of time were mostly for the working and wealthy class, and were considered a place where people went to die. It wasn't until the late 1800s where hospitals were looked upon as a place of healing. But even then, many soldiers had died from their wounds in the hospitals. In fact, more than 2/3 of the deaths in the war resulted from the butchery and medicinal practices. One of the more fatal medicinal practices were amputations. Once brought back from the battlefield, most surgeons saw surgery for these soldiers to be useless. They resorted to amputating full limbs as it would be the only way to save a life. There were more than 50,000 amputations in the Civil War, causing soldiers to come back home armless, legless, footless, or all. Due to the amount of surgeries occurring, overworked surgeons used a special bullet known as the Minette ball to amputate. This practice of amputation would go down in history as being one of the deadliest medicinal practices in the history of war, seeing that it would create more problems than solved. Hospitality is another cause of the many fatalities in the war. Sanitation and competence was not up to regular standards in these hospitals, which oftentimes were dirty, old buildings converted from previous civilian uses. Due to these poor conditions, infection and disease was very common. Such diseases included smallpox, measles, malaria, and tuberculosis, and infections became inevitable and malignant. Since penicillin and other antibiotics were ahead of their time, diseases were often incurable and led to death and devastation. While there were many setbacks in medicine and hospitality, there were many advancements such as anesthesia. However, 19th century anesthesia was very different and brute. 75% of all surgeries had doctors using chemicals to anesthetize through a technique called open drop. This involved putting chloroform on a cloth and draping it over the patient's nose and mouth until they were unconscious. Another form of anesthesia was ether, which was common but often left patients awake through the entire surgery. Civil War era hospitals proved to be an under-equipped, unsanitary environment in which dangerous medicinal practices led to many of the deaths in the war. However, these hospitals can also be viewed as a major accomplishment. It was the first practice of an effective hospital system that linked together wounded soldiers. It also brought about one of the first effective ambulance hospital systems, consisting of a team of trained personnel who turned entire buildings and homes into places of treatment and housing. Generals visited each of these establishments to make sure that the standards of sanitation and care was met. This would later become the standard military wounded system in World War II. By 1863, multiple buildings were renovated into hospitals, and 10 hospitals were set up all across the battlefield to make sure that soldiers get treatment and care as quick as they could. That brings me to the end of my lecture on hospitals in this American Civil War. This is Omar Kahled signing off.